The flashbulbs were blinding, but not as blinding as Arthur Vance's hubris. On the night of his 20th anniversary, from the stage of the opulent Astra Tower he believed he built, he raised a crystal glass. But the toast wasn't to his wife, Eleanor. It was a eulogy for her relevance. He called her his anchor, a word that sounded like a compliment, but was delivered like a sentence. He smirked as the crowd tittered, soaking in the spotlight. He had no idea that this anchor wasn't just holding him steady. She was the one who had designed the harbour, built the fleet, and charted the maps. And he had just given her the signal to scuttle his ship. The Astra Tower's grand ballroom was a monument to Arthur Vance's ego. Soaring 50 stories above the city, the room was a symphony of glass and brushed steel, with panoramic views that made the skyline look like a carpet of diamonds. Tables were draped in silver linen, each bearing an impossible sculpture of orchids and white roses. The guest list was a calculated roster of power. Mayor David Chen was schmoozing by the champagne fountain. Senator Harrison was in a deep, head-nodding conversation with a rival developer, Ethan Reed, and scattered throughout were the bankers, lawyers, and media figures that made up Arthur's world. Arthur Vance moved through this crowd not like a host, but like a monarch. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, his smile was 1,000 watts, and his handshakes were firm and proprietary. He was at the absolute peak of his life, and this 20th anniversary gala was less a celebration of his marriage and more a coronation of his success. And then there was Eleanor. Eleanor Vance was a study in quiet contrast. While Arthur was a supernova, she was the calm, dark space between the stars. She wore a deep emerald gown, elegant and timeless, but it was designed to deflect, not attract, attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple chignon. She was standing near a marble pillar, observing. She watched Arthur work the room, a faint, unreadable expression on her face. She saw him laugh, a booming sound, as he clapped the shoulder of a banker. She saw the new, ambitious head of communications, Serafina Hayes, drift toward him. Serafina was everything Eleanor was not. She was a blaze of scarlet silk, her blonde hair perfectly tousled, her laugh just a little too loud. She was new, hired 3 months prior, and had already made herself indispensable to Arthur, whispering in his ear, managing his public image, and, as the whispers in the office suggested, much more. Arthur finally spotted Eleanor. He strode over, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He pecked her cheek, a dry, papery gesture that smelled of expensive whiskey. "There you are, Ellie," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Trying to blend in with the flora again? You should be mingling. This is a party, after all. Our party." "I am mingling, Arthur. I was just speaking with Mr. Henderson about the zoning for the new waterfront project," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but clear. Arthur waved a dismissive hand. "Zoning. Always the details. Leave the boring parts to the lawyers, darling. Tonight, you're supposed to be the queen." He said the word queen, but it sounded like an accusation, as if she were failing at the role. He didn't notice that while he spoke, Eleanor had subtly motioned to a catering captain. She pointed discreetly at Senator Harrison's table, where the senator was looking in vain for a waiter. A moment later, a bottle of 98 Lafite, the senator's private preference, a detail Eleanor had logged in her mental database, appeared at his elbow. The senator beamed. Arthur, meanwhile, had already turned away, drawn by Serafina's radiant smile. "Arthur, darling," Serafina purred, linking her arm through his. "The press from the Financial Times is here. They want a word about the Q4 projections." "Ah, exactly," Arthur said, puffing his chest. He gave Eleanor a final look. "You see, Ellie, the Empire never sleeps. Try to. Enjoy yourself." He let Serafina lead him away, his hand lingering on the small of her back. Eleanor watched them go. She did not look hurt. She did not look angry. She looked like an engineer watching a complex piece of machinery begin to spark, a critical failure imminent. She turned her gaze to Marcus Cole, the company's longtime CFO. Marcus was a quiet, unassuming man with steel-grey hair and an accountant's sober demeanor. He was standing alone, nursing a club soda. He caught Eleanor's eye from across the room and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of loyalty, of shared knowledge. He knew exactly who had really spoken to Henderson about the waterfront zoning. He knew who had built the financial models for the Q4 projections Arthur was about to boast about. He, and perhaps he alone in this entire room, knew that Eleanor Vance was not the woman standing in Arthur's shadow. She was the one who had built the tower casting it. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Arthur's personal assistant, a young, eager man named Robert, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to welcome the man of the hour, the visionary who rebuilt this city's skyline, and the host of this wonderful evening, Mr. Arthur Vance." The room erupted in applause. Arthur practically jogged to the stage, soaking in the adoration. He took the microphone, his smile blinding. He scanned the room, his eyes landing first on Serafina in the front row, and then, almost as an afterthought, on Eleanor, who had remained by her pillar. "Thank you, Robert," Arthur began, his voice like velvet. "Thank you all for being here. 20 years. 20 years. He paused for dramatic effect. The speech was about to begin. Arthur held the microphone like a scepter. The room was his. 20 years ago, he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. I was a young man with a dream. I had $5,000 in a checking account, a suit I'd rented, and an idea. An idea that this city, our beautiful city, could be more. That we could reach for the sky. And look at us now. He gestured to the window, to the glittering city 50 stories below. The crowd applauded on cue. He was a master conductor, and they were his orchestra. People talk about success, he continued, and they talk about vision. They talk about drive. And I'll be the first to admit, I have those things. He laughed, and the crowd laughed with him. But they also say, behind every great man, there is a great woman. He paused, and the spotlight swung, finding Eleanor by the pillar. She stood perfectly still, her face a pale oval in the harsh light. Arthur's smile tightened, becoming less of a smile and more of a baring of teeth. And Eleanor, well, Eleanor was there. She was there from the beginning. Weren't you, darling? The tone was wrong. It wasn't appreciative. It was condescending. The air in the room grew thin. Mayor Chen shifted uncomfortably. They say that, but this is the 21st century, Arthur went on, a strange, cruel energy rising in him. He was performing now, not just for the crowd, but for Serafina, who was watching him with undisguised adoration. In the modern age, shouldn't the woman be, well, standing beside him? Or at least keeping up? A nervous titter went through the room. Ethan Reed, the rival developer, leaned back with a smirk, sensing blood in the water. Eleanor, Arthur said, raising his glass directly to her, has always been my anchor. He let the word hang in the air. A steady, reliable anchor. Always there. Always in the same place, keeping me moored. He laughed again, a short, sharp bark. But you can't build an empire from the harbor, can you? An empire is built by sailing. It needs wind in its sails. It needs dynamism. It needs people who understand the speed of now. He then did the unforgivable. He turned his body and his toast away from his wife of 20 years, and aimed it directly at the front table. It needs new blood, new energy. People like our brilliant, dynamic, new head of communications, Serafina Hayes. She understands vision. She understands me. To the future, Serafina. He drank. Serafina, beaming, rose slightly from her seat and raised her glass back to him. The camera flashes were epileptic. They weren't focused on Arthur anymore. They were focused on Eleanor. They were vultures, capturing the precise moment of her execution. But Eleanor Vance didn't cry. She didn't flush with shame or rage. Her face remained pale, her expression unreadable. Her spine, visible against the emerald silk of her gown, seemed to be forged from high tensile steel. For a full 10 seconds, she held the gaze of the room, held the flash of the cameras. Then, with a devastating, regal calm, she placed her untouched champagne flute on the tray of a passing waiter. She did not look at Arthur. She did not look at Serafina. She turned, and with measured, unhurried steps, she walked away from the pillar, across the vast, silent ballroom, and through the grand double doors. The click, click, click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. The doors swung shut behind her with a soft whoosh. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur, still on stage, faltered. The drunken, arrogant high was evaporating, replaced by a cold prickle of something. Confusion? Annoyance? Well, he stammered, trying to recapture the moment. She was probably just tired. A long night. Anyway, to Vance Global, and to the next 20 years. He raised his glass again, but the applause was sparse, mechanical. The spell was broken. He had gone too far. He hadn't just insulted his wife, he had shown himself to be a fool. Across the room, Clarissa Dunn, the formidable CEO of Blackwood Capital, a key investor, stood up, gathered her wrap, and walked out without a word. Arthur didn't see it. He was too busy forcing a smile, blinded by the spotlight he craved, completely unaware that his world had just been unplugged. Arthur woke the next morning to the merciless glare of the sun filtering through his penthouse blinds. His head felt like a split watermelon, pulsing with a dull, whiskey-soaked rhythm. His first emotion was not remorse, it was irritation. "Eleanor," he mumbled, reaching across the vast, empty California King. "Get Robert on the phone. Tell him to move my 10 o'clock." The sheets beside him were cold. He sat up, groaning. The events of the party came back to him in fuzzy, unpleasant snapshots. The speech, the toast, Eleanor walking out. "Damn it," he muttered. So dramatic. Making a scene, all because of a little joke. He swung his legs out of bed, convinced that this was just another of Eleanor's quiet moods. He'd apologize, a breezy, "Sorry you were so sensitive, darling," and she would get over it. She always did. He dressed, bypassing the suit his valet had laid out, and opted for a more casual, in-command look. Charcoal trousers and a crisp blue shirt, sleeves already rolled up. He was in damage control mode, not because he felt guilty, but because he knew the optics were bad. Serafina would have to handle the press. He stepped out of his private elevator into the lobby of the Vance Global building. He walked toward the executive turnstiles, reserved for him and his C-suite. He swiped his all-access keycard. Beep, beep. Access denied. Arthur frowned. He swiped it again. Beep, beep. Access denied. A security guard he didn't recognize looked over. "Problem, sir?" "This damn card," Arthur growled. "It's malfunctioning. You'll have to sign in at the front desk, sir, and use the public elevators." Arthur's face purpled. "Sign in? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Policy, sir," the guard said, unmoved. Fuming, Arthur stomped to the main reception, was forced to show his driver's license like a common salesman, and endured the indignity of the crowded public elevator, which stopped at 3 different floors. By the time he reached his office on the 49th floor, he was a storm cloud ready to burst. His assistant, Robert, leaped from his desk, his face pale. "Mr. Vance, good morning, sir. Get it up here now to fix my keycard and get me a coffee," Arthur snapped, storming into his cavern-sized corner office. "And where the hell is Eleanor? Is she in her office?" Eleanor had a small, functional office on the 45th floor, near the finance department. Arthur rarely visited it. I don't know, sir. She hasn't been in," Robert stammered, following him. "Mr. Vance, there's a problem. You're 10 a.m. with the Blackwood Capital team." "Ah, right. The Meridian deal." "Good." Arthur sat behind his massive mahogany desk. "Tell them I'll be ready. This'll be the biggest deal of the decade." "Sir, it's been cancelled." Arthur froze. "What did you say?" "Cancelled, sir." "We got an email at 8:01 a.m. from Clarissa Dunn's personal office. I printed it for you." Robert handed him a single sheet of paper. It was brutally short. "Mr. Vance, in light of last night's events, Blackwood Capital is postponing our involvement in Project Meridian indefinitely, pending a full internal review of our partnership with Vance Global. Regards, C. Dunn." "Postponed? Indefinitely? What events?" Arthur roared. "It was a party. Get Clarissa on the phone, now." "Her assistant said she's unavailable, for the week." "Then get Marcus Cole in here." Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. "He'll fix this. He'll call her. They're old friends or something." "Mr. Cole isn't in, sir," Robert said, wringing his hands. "He's not answering his office line or his cell. His assistant just said he's off-site, auditing the assets." "Auditing what?" At 9 in the morning? Arthur felt the first real spike of cold fear. Marcus was never unavailable. He was the most reliable, boringly predictable man Arthur knew. Just then, Serafina Hayes swept into the office, not bothering to knock. She was wearing a tight, professional white dress and looked perfectly fresh. "Arthur, darling, the press is difficult," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "They're all running with the anchor quote. It's trending. But don't worry, I have a plan. We'll release a statement about your shared passion for maritime metaphors and—" "Shut up, Serafina!" Arthur snapped. She recoiled. "What?" "I'm not worried about the press," he lied. "Blackwood just pulled the Meridian deal. That's a $200 million project. I need to see the file. I need to see where our exposure is." He toggled his computer, clicking the icon for the company's internal server. He navigated to the Strategic Projects folder. He clicked Project Meridian. The folder was empty. "What? Robert, where is the Meridian file?" "I don't know, sir. It was there on Friday." "Then find it." Arthur started clicking frantically. He tried the Acquisitions folder. Empty. Zoning Contracts. Empty. Investor Proposals. Empty. "Sir," Robert said, his voice trembling, "the entire strategic drive, it's empty." Arthur stared at the screen. This was not a glitch. This was an attack. "Find out what she did," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Serafina looked confused. "What, who did? The press? A rival?" Arthur's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw not a charismatic leader, but a cornered animal. "Eleanor. Find out what Eleanor did." The panic that had started as a cold spike now became a full-blown Arctic current, flooding Arthur's veins. "Get David Kim in here," Arthur commanded, referring to the head of his IT department. "Lock down the building. I want to know who accessed that server." "Mr. Kim is already on his way, sir," Robert said, his face ashen. He called me. He said it's a level 1 event. A moment later, David Kim, a man who usually looked perpetually stressed, burst in. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Vance, it's not a hack," Kim said, bypassing all pleasantries. "We've been monitoring the logs since 6 a.m. There's no external breach." "Then what is it? Where are my files?" "They're not just gone, Mr. Vance. The entire virtual server, the Atlas drive, which holds all strategic data, it's been migrated. The data was transferred, and the drive was then digitally decommissioned." "Migrated? Migrated where? Who authorized it?" David Kim swallowed. He was holding a tablet. "That's the problem, sir. The authorization came from the root administrator account, the one that supersedes even your own." Arthur was baffled. "I am the root administrator. My password is Astra King 49. David Kim winced at the terrible password. "No, sir. You have a Tier A admin account. But there's always one root account, the one that created the system. We've never had to access it. It's just been there. The user ID is encrypted. It's just 2 letters." "Which 2? Arthur demanded. "EK." Arthur stared. "EK?" It meant nothing to him. "Who is EK? Find them." "I can't," David said, his voice rising in panic. "The account is secured with a 256-bit encryption key that's not stored on our system. It's on a physical hardware token. And that's not all. The Atlas server itself. The physical hardware, it's not even in the building." "What do you mean it's not in the building? I paid $1 million for that server room." "The old servers are there, sir. The ones we use for email and daily operations. But the Atlas system, I've tracked the work order. It was a proprietary Blade server. It was installed in 2007 by a private contractor. According to this," he tapped his tablet, "it was physically removed from the premises at 4:15 this morning by a bonded tech team. The work order was signed by Marcus Cole." Marcus. It all came back to Marcus and EK. Arthur's mind was racing, trying to connect dots that wouldn't. EK. He remembered a joke decades ago in their first tiny one-bedroom apartment. Eleanor had been poring over blueprints, a textbook on structural engineering beside her. He'd been frustrated, wanting to go out. "You and your books," he'd scoffed. "You're like the keystone of this whole boring operation." She had smiled, a rare, private smile. "The keystone holds everything up, Arthur. Don't forget that. Eleanor Keystone." It was the name of the dummy corporation she'd set up to hold the patent for a small software she'd written, something about property taxes. He'd thought it was a cute hobby. His blood ran cold. Atlas. That was the name of the software. It wasn't just a server drive, it was her software. The proprietary algorithm that analyzed zoning laws, demographic shifts, and material costs. The system he took credit for in Forbes, calling it his instinct, digitized. He always assumed his IT team had built it. He scrambled for his phone, his hands shaking. He didn't call Marcus. He called his personal lawyer, Stephen Grant. "Stephen, thank God. I need you to file an injunction. Now, Eleanor, she's stealing from me." There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. "Stephen, did you hear me?" "I heard you, Arthur." Stephen's voice was flat, devoid of its usual collegial warmth. "Well, get it done. She's locked me out of my own company. She and Marcus Cole." "Arthur," Stephen said, and his voice was heavy. "I'm afraid I can't do that. As of 9 a.m. this morning, my firm no longer represents Vance Global. Or you, personally." "What? I've had you on retainer for 15 years. "Yes, and I've always appreciated the business. But a conflict of interest has arisen." "What conflict?" My firm has, for 20 years, held the charter for Keystone Holdings LLC. My primary fiduciary duty is to that client. And as of this morning, Keystone has called in its primary operational loan to Vance Global Properties. Arthur sank into his chair. He couldn't feel his legs. What loan? We're liquid. We're fine. No, Arthur, you're not. You're heavily leveraged. You always have been. You've been funding your acquisitions, your payroll, even this building, through a revolving line of credit extended by Keystone Holdings. You signed the original agreement in 2005, the one you famously told me you didn't have time to read, because you had a tea time. You just wanted to know where to sign. Arthur was suffocating. Keystone, that's my holding company. I control it. No, Arthur, Stephen said, and the pity in his voice was like acid. You never did. You are the CEO of Vance Global, a C Corp. You own 10% of the voting shares. The other 90%, the controlling interest, has always been held by Keystone Holdings, and the sole signatory, the sole owner and beneficiary of that blind trust, is Eleanor Keystone Vance. I'm sorry, Arthur. Your company is in default. As of this moment, it's insolvent. Don't sign anything. The line clicked dead. Arthur sat in the silence. Serafina and Robert were staring at him, their faces masks of terror. His company wasn't his office wasn't his life wasn't his. It all belonged to E.K. It all belonged to Eleanor. Arthur Vance moved like a ghost. He pushed past the stunned Serafina and Robert, left his office, and took the public elevator down. He didn't know where he was going. He was on autopilot, his mind a roaring void. He drove his Bentley, one of the few things he owned outright, towards their Greenwich estate. He needed to find her. He needed to what? Yell? Beg? When he reached the 20-foot-high wrought-iron gates, he punched in his security code. Invalid code. Access denied. He hammered the keypad again. Invalid code. He sat in his car, staring at the house he'd bought for her, and realized he was locked out. The humiliation from the guard at the office was nothing. This was a total, systematic erasure. He got out of the car, his legs unsteady. He found a section of the stone wall that was lower and, in his $2,000 suit, ignominiously climbed over it, ripping the fabric. He stumbled onto the perfectly manicured lawn and ran to the front door. It was locked. He used the spare key, hidden under a stone planter. It slid into the lock but wouldn't turn. The locks had been changed. Crying out in a raw animal sound of rage and despair, he ran around the back to the patio. The sliding glass door was, mercifully, unlocked. He stepped inside. The house was cavernously empty, but it wasn't empty of furniture. His massive, gaudy sofas were still there. His trophies for Developer of the Year were still on the shelves. His 8-foot-tall portrait in the foyer was still hanging. Her things were gone. The abstract, challenging paintings she loved were gone, leaving pale squares on the walls. His hunting scenes and portraits of himself remained. Her vast collection of first-edition architecture and philosophy books was gone from the library. Only his thrillers and business biographies were left. Her office, usually a cluttered creative space, was sterile. The desk was clear. The computers were gone. All her clothes were gone from the vast walk-in closet. All her jewelry from the safe. All that was left was his own sprawling, disorganized mess. He had built a shrine to himself, and she had simply evacuated. She had taken her life out of his, leaving him alone with the empty, vulgar shell he had created. On the massive, cold marble island in the kitchen, an island he'd insisted on, though she'd said it was impossibly impractical, was a single plain white envelope. His name, Arthur, was written on it in her precise architectural script. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely open it. He expected a letter, a torrent of anger, a heartbroken plea. Inside was no letter, just a single plastic keycard. It was a simple white card with no logo. On it, written in the same black marker, was an address, 1124, Birch Street, 6th floor. He knew the address. It was the first office space they had ever rented, 2 decades ago. A tiny 3-room suite in a run-down, pre-war brick building downtown, in a neighborhood that hadn't gentrified yet. He'd hated the place. It was cramped, the heating was unreliable, and it smelled like dust. He'd insisted they move into a glass high-rise the second they'd landed their first big contract. He thought they had sold that building years ago. He drove, breaking every speed limit. He parked his Bentley on the cracked pavement of Birch Street, a stark contrast to the graffiti and an old bodega. He entered the building. The lobby was the same, worn-out terrazzo flooring, a dim, buzzing light. He found the elevator and swiped the card. The light turned green. The elevator, old and creaking, began its ascent. When it reached the 6th floor, the top floor, the doors slid open. This was not the office he remembered. The dusty, cramped suite was gone. The entire floor had been gutted. It was now a high-tech, glass-walled command center, humming with the quiet power of dozens of high-end servers. 20 people he vaguely recognized from the finance and data analysis departments at Vance Global, were working with intense, quiet focus. They were plugged into data streams he didn't recognize. The walls were covered in monitors displaying market data, architectural blueprints, and legal documents. It was a war room, and in the center of it all, at a sleek, minimalist standing desk, was Eleanor. She was not the wallpaper wife from the party. She was wearing a tailored navy blue pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She was on the phone, a wireless earpiece in. She held a stylus, making notes on a large touch screen that showed the floor plan of the Meridian project. Marcus Cole was standing beside her, pointing to a data point on a screen. She finished her call. "No, tell Clarissa the capital is secure. We are exercising Article 4 of the partnership agreement. The Vance brand is compromised. We are moving all assets, patents, and contracts to the new entity. Effective immediately. Yes. Meridian. It's done." She clicked off the call and finally turned her eyes to Arthur. Her gaze was not angry. It was not sad. It was diagnostic. It was the look she'd given the cracked foundation of a building they were assessing. She was judging his structural integrity and finding him wanting. "Arthur," she said, her voice echoing in the high-tech space. "You're late. But that's not new." "Eleanor," he breathed, the word torn from him. "What is this? What have you done?" "I'm glad you asked," she said, stepping out from behind the desk. "You're here to listen. You will not interrupt." "Marcus, will you make sure he doesn't interrupt?" Marcus Cole, a man Arthur had always considered a harmless bean counter, stepped forward. He looked formidable. "Sit down, Arthur," Marcus said. It was not a request. Arthur, his legs giving out, collapsed into a steel and leather chair. The execution was about to begin. Eleanor walked to the front of the room, standing before a large, blank smart screen. She tapped it, and it lit up with a timeline. "You're a man who loves stories, Arthur," she began, her voice cold and even, like a lecturer's. "Especially your own. The man with $5,000 and a dream. It's a great story. Compelling. But it's fiction. Now, You will listen to the truth." She pointed to the start of the timeline, year 2005. 20 years ago, you had $5,000 and a rented suit. She tapped the screen, and a bank statement appeared, had $2.4 million in a trust, an inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who believed in women's education and shrewd investments. You had charisma. I had a dual degree in systems engineering and finance from Wharton. Arthur opened his mouth, but a look from Marcus silenced him. "We made an agreement, Arthur. Do you remember? In that tiny apartment on Birch Street, right here on this floor. You said, 'Ellie, I can sell. I can be the face. You're no good with people. You're too quiet.' And you were right. I hated the schmoozing. I just wanted to build. So we made a deal." She advanced the timeline. "I founded Keystone Holdings, LLC. I used my inheritance to provide 100% of the seed capital for a new company, Vance Global Properties. You were given a 10% stake and the title of CEO. Your job was to be the face, the brand. My job was to do everything else." The screen changed. It showed the code for the Atlas program. "This," she said, "is Atlas, my postgraduate thesis. It's not a property analysis tool, you fool. It's a predictive economic modeling system. It analyzes demographic shifts, zoning law precedents, materials futures, and political sentiment to predict neighborhood growth 5, 10, and 20 years out. It's why we never lost money, even in the 2008 crash. It's why we bought in the warehouse district in 2010, when everyone else was selling. This algorithm, this ghost in the machine, is the entire engine of Vance Global, and it belongs exclusively to Keystone Holdings." She kept clicking. Financial charts appeared. Every loan, every line of credit, every bold acquisition you took credit for. It was all financed internally by Keystone. You weren't a risk-taker, Arthur. You were a man on the world's most generous allowance. You were, in effect, my highest-paid employee, a mascot for the brand. "Ellie." "No," he whispered. "My name is Eleanor," she snapped, and the ice in her voice made him flinch. "You brought up Clarissa Dunn. You told Marcus to call her. Clarissa Dunn was my roommate at Wharton. She didn't invest in Vance Global. She invested in me. The Blackwood Capital deal was contingent on my personal oversight." "Marcus?" Marcus Cole stepped forward. "I was hired by Eleanor in 2007. My employment contract, my loyalty, and my non-disclosure agreement are with Keystone Holdings, not Vance Global. For 18 years, I have managed 2 sets of books, the public-facing ones for Vance Global and the private, consolidated ones for Keystone." You lied to me," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "All of you." "Did we?" Eleanor walked closer to him. "Or did you simply stop seeing me? Did you stop asking? When was the last time you asked me about the boring details, Arthur? 10 years ago? 15? You were too busy accepting awards, posing for magazines, and entertaining new blood, like Miss Hayes." The mention of Serafina hit him like a slap. "I loved you," she said, and for the first time, a flicker of the old Eleanor, the quiet woman at the party, was in her voice. It was raw pain. And it worked. I didn't mind the background. I just wanted to build. I was proud of what we built. But then you started to believe it. You started to believe you were the visionary. You started to look at me, the woman who designed and financed the stage you were standing on, with contempt. You thought I was a relic, an anchor. She stood directly in front of him now, looking down at the broken man in the chair. You didn't just shame your wife at that party, Arthur. You shamed your partner, your banker, your strategist, and your boss. She turned away from him. And an anchor isn't just a weight, you arrogant fool. It's the one point of contact with solid ground. It's the only thing that stops the ship from being dashed on the rocks in a storm. And you cut the line, in front of the whole world. Arthur stumbled to his feet. The room was spinning. He was looking at a stranger. This woman, this cold, brilliant, ruthless executive, was not the Ellie he had ignored for a decade. "Eleanor, please," he begged, the word scraping his throat. It was a mistake, a stupid, drunken joke. It was the champagne. It was Serafina. She got in my head. I didn't mean it. We can fix this. I'll issue a press release. I'll tell the world the truth. That it was all you. Eleanor let out a short, harsh laugh. You'll do no such thing. Firstly, you are bound by the most ironclad non-disclosure agreement Stephen Grant has ever written, the one you signed in 2005. If you breathe a word of Keystone's involvement, I will personally see you in prison for the rest of your life. You will not slander me, and you will not take credit for my work. But our company, it was never your company, she said, the finality in her voice crushing him. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Keystone Holdings has called in its loans. Vance Global Properties is insolvent. It's bankrupt. As the CEO, you will be named in the bankruptcy filings. The press you love so much will have a field day. Bankrupt? No. He thought of the Astra Tower. His name, his legacy. Everything. It's all gone. The debt is gone, Eleanor corrected him. Or rather, it's all been consolidated onto your books. The assets, however, are perfectly fine. The patents, the properties, the Atlas system, the client contracts, they were all collateral. And Keystone has, as of an hour ago, legally seized all of them. They have been transferred to my new holding company. She gestured to the largest screen. A logo he'd never seen flickered to life. A sleek, silver M. Meridian Strategic Properties, Eleanor announced. The new entity, all our clients, including Blackwood Capital, have already been notified. Clarissa was thrilled to hear I was finally putting my own name on the letterhead. Our key staff, she gestured to the focused team around them, have all signed their new employment contracts with Meridian. They were given the choice. They chose, wisely, to follow the architect, not the figurehead. Arthur looked around at the faces. David Kim from IT, the top data analysts. They wouldn't even look at him. They were already busy, working for her. What am I left with? He whispered, the full, horrifying scope of his oblivion finally setting in. Eleanor picked up a tablet and read from it, as if discussing a property line. You are left with the Vance Global brand, which, after the news of your spectacular public humiliation of your wife, followed by your immediate bankruptcy, is toxic and worthless. You are left with your 10% of a now-defunct company. You are left with your personal effects, and your personal debts, which are substantial. I've had a forensic accounting team on your personal expenses for 6 months. Her eyes hardened. Which brings us to Ms. Hayes. I had a severance package delivered to her apartment this morning. It included a copy of the receipts for the business trips to the Caymans, the jewelry you bought on the company card, and the lease you co-signed on her apartment. It also included a notice that Meridian Strategic will be suing her for misappropriation of corporate funds if she ever contacts you, or anyone at this company, again. I don't imagine she'll be sticking around a broke, disgraced man. She's ambitious, after all. He had nothing. He had no company, no money, no mistress, no home. The penthouse, he stammered. The house? The Greenwich estate is a Keystone asset. It's already being listed. The penthouse at the Astra Tower is in your name, but it's leveraged against the default. It will be seized by the creditors, which again is me. You have 48 hours to vacate. Robert, she said, not to him, but to his former assistant, who was now working at a terminal. Please validate Mr. Vance's parking. She turned her back on him, a final, brutal dismissal. Okay, people, Eleanor said to her new team, her voice ringing with energy. Let's get back to work. We have a $200 million deal to close. Arthur Vance stood alone in the center of the humming room, an irrelevant ghost in the machine he'd never known existed. He stumbled back to the elevator, his reflection in the glass doors showing him not a king, not a visionary, but just a man. A fool who had been given a kingdom and had torn it down, stone by stone, because he was too arrogant to see the architect who had been holding his hand and holding up the walls the entire time. He had shamed his wife, and in doing so, he had authored his own end. The creak of the old elevator descending from the 6th floor of 1124 Birch Street was the sound of Arthur Vance's world ending. He stood numbly inside the rattling metal box, his reflection a pale, ghostly mask in the scratched stainless steel door. The man staring back at him was a stranger. His custom suit was ripped at the knee from climbing his own wall. His eyes were hollow, and his face, usually so ruddy and confident, was the color of ash. When the doors opened onto the building's worn terrazzo lobby, the buzzing fluorescent light felt like an assault. He stumbled out onto the cracked pavement of the sidewalk. The city he once claimed as his own, his skyline, seemed to mock him. The skyscrapers, including his own Astra Tower in the distance, were sharp, indifferent fingers pointing at a sky that was suddenly too bright. He got into the Bentley. His hands shook so violently he dropped the keys twice. When he finally managed to start the engine, the purr of the V12, a sound that once filled him with a sense of godlike power, was now just a low, mournful noise. He had nowhere to go. He pulled out his phone, driven by a masochistic impulse. The screen lit up with a wildfire of alerts. Bloomberg. Vance Global files for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy amidst leadership collapse. Financial Times. The Vance Empire in freefall. CEO Arthur. Vance ousted. Assets seized by shadow lender. The Post. He's an anchor. Vance's anniversary speech goes viral as company implodes. The last one had a video clip attached. He didn't need to watch it. He drove. He had no destination. He was a ghost in a very expensive machine. He tried to call Serafina. He needed a voice, an ally, even a co-conspirator. The call went straight to a generic automated message. The number you have dialed has been disconnected, or is no BLOCKED. Eleanor had been right. She was gone. He tried to call his lawyer, Stephen, the firm's main line. Grant, Miller and Hayes, how may I direct your call? I need to speak to Stephen Grant. It's Arthur Vance. A click. A moment of silence. I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Grant is in a meeting. He will be unavailable indefinitely. Click. He was an island, and the tide was rising. Eventually, he found himself parked across the street from the Astra Tower, his monument, his tomb. He watched for an hour as a stream of sleek black cars pulled up. He saw Clarissa Dunn get out of one, followed by Ethan Reed, his rival. They weren't going to a party. They were walking into his building, which he now knew was her building, to meet with her. He spent that night in the back seat of his Bentley, parked in a dimly lit garage, the supple leather seats a cold, uncaring cradle. He was 55 years old, and he had nothing but the clothes on his back and a car that he'd probably have to sell by the end of the week. The visionary was a vagrant. 6 months passed. Winter had come to the city, stripping the trees bare. Arthur Vance sat in a small, furnished studio apartment above a laundromat. The room smelled of stale coffee and fabric softener. He had sold the Bentley, the Tom Ford suits, the Patek Philippe watch. He lived off the proceeds, which were dwindling with alarming speed. He was on a second-hand laptop, scrolling through a job site. He had tried to find work. He was Arthur Vance, after all. He had built an empire. But his name was not just toxic. It was a joke, a byword for hubris. In one disastrous interview for a mid-level consulting gig, the hiring manager, a man half his age, had looked at his resume and had the audacity to ask, "So, Mr. Vance, what exactly was it you did at your old company?" Arthur had no answer. He looked out his grimy window at the street below. A newsstand at the corner had a new magazine on display. He could see the cover even from here. It was Forbes, the Person of the Year issue. The cover was not a studio portrait. It was a photograph, vibrant and full of life, taken on a windswept construction site. A woman stood in the center, her dark hair pulled back under a white, hard hat. She was wearing practical boots and a tailored peacoat, and she was laughing, her head tilted back, as she reviewed a set of blueprints with a group of engineers. Her face, which he had once called plain, was the most radiant, powerful thing he had ever seen. The headline was simple: "The Architect, Eleanor Vance, on Building a Better World. Meridian Strategic Shapes the Future." He read the smaller text below it. "From the shadows of a broken empire, the true visionary emerges." Arthur let the curtain fall. He sat back on his sagging mattress, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He felt no rage. He felt no anger. That had burned out months ago, leaving nothing but a cold, hollow void. He finally understood. He wasn't the man who had lost an empire. He was just the guy who had been married to the woman who built one. He was a footnote in her story. He was, as he had so prophetically declared, the anchor, and he had been cut loose, left to sink into the silt, while her ship, light and free, finally sailed on. 50 stories above the city, in a bright, open-plan office that prioritized light and collaboration, Eleanor Vance stood at a smart screen. The Meridian Strategic logo, a subtle silver M, was projected behind her. The room was full of investors, city planners, and the entire Blackwood Capital team. "The problem with the Vance Global model," Eleanor said, her voice clear and confident, "was that it was built on a singular, toxic idea. That a building is a monument to its owner. It was about ego. It was about height. It was hollow." She clicked to a new slide, showing a stunning, green-infused design of the new Meridian project. It was not a single phallic tower, but a series of interconnected buildings, woven with public parks, affordable housing units, and sustainable energy systems. "Meridian builds for communities," she continued. "Our Atlas system isn't just predicting financial growth, it's predicting human need. We are projecting a 40% reduction in energy use, a 30% increase in access to public green space, and a 15% increase in local small business retention. We're not just building property, we're building a neighborhood." "Clarissa?" Clarissa Dunn smiled. "Meridian's numbers are the most solid I've ever seen. Blackwood is doubling our investment. We are all in." The room broke into applause. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Marcus Cole, now her COO, handed her a tablet. "The zoning just cleared," he murmured. "It's a green light." "Good," she said, nodding. "Excellent. Let's get to work." She looked out the window. Her window. From here, she could just see the small brick building on Birch Street, where it all began. She had kept the 6th-floor war room as a reminder of her silence and a reminder of her strength. She was not a queen. She was not a victim. She was an architect. And she was, at long, long last, just getting started. Arthur Vance learned the hard way that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. He traded a kingdom for a punchline. By the time he realized his wife wasn't just in his shadow, but that she was the one casting it, it was too late. His empire was gone. His name was a disgrace, and Eleanor Vance was on the cover of Forbes, finally credited as the silent genius he had tried to erase. It's a brutal lesson. Never mistake a partner's silence for submission or their quiet support for weakness. They just might be the ones who own the company. What did you think of Arthur's spectacular downfall? Was Eleanor's revenge justified, or was it too cold? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you loved this story and want more real-life drama, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have new stories coming for you every week. The blinding flash of 1,000 cameras illuminates the most scandalous kiss of the decade. There, on the crimson carpet of the Metropolitan Legacy Gala, stands Alistair Vance, a titan of industry worth billions, his lips locked with a starlet half his age. The world's media holds its breath, capturing the blatant betrayal in high definition. This isn't just an affair, it's a public declaration of war on his marriage. But the real story isn't the billionaire's shocking infidelity. It's what happens 60 seconds later. As the gasps ripple through the crowd, a lone Rolls-Royce Phantom pulls up. The door opens and the real Mrs. Vance emerges, and she isn't crying. She's coming to collect. The air in the Upper East Side penthouse was always the same, thin, cool, and smelling faintly of freesia and sterilized money. It was an atmosphere Serafina Vance had curated, just as she had curated every other aspect of their lives. From the Jean-Michel Basquiat painting that hung opposite a Gerhard Richter, a deliberately provocative pairing she'd chosen to unnerve stuffy investors, to the precise temperature of the wine in the cellar, everything was a testament to her meticulous control. Everything, it seemed, except her husband. Alistair Vance moved through their shared space like a conquering king, inspecting a territory he'd long since grown bored of. He was a man built by headlines and leveraged buyouts, his charisma a weapon he wielded with casual cruelty. Tonight, he was a storm of expensive cologne and restless energy, shrugging on a Tom Ford tuxedo jacket that cost more than the average person's car. "You're not ready?" he asked, not looking at her. His eyes were on his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, which framed a glittering, subservient Manhattan. Serafina sat at her vanity, a still point in his whirlwind. She wore a simple silk robe, her back to him. Her own reflection showed a woman of unnerving composure, her features sharp and intelligent, her eyes the color of a stormy sea. For 15 years, she had been the silent architect of his empire. He was the face, the thunderous voice on earnings calls, the ruthless negotiator the papers loved to call the vulture. But she was the strategist, the one who saw the chessboard from above, who understood that true power wasn't in the loud pronouncements, but in the quiet, unseen moves. "The invitation said 8, she replied, her voice calm and even. She picked up a diamond earring, a massive pear-cut stone from Cartier, a gift from their 10th anniversary. A guilt offering, she'd known at the time, for an affair he thought she'd never discovered. She had discovered them all. "I'm going ahead. I have to greet the board members from the Tokyo acquisition," he said, adjusting his bow tie. It was a lie, a sloppy one. The Tokyo deal had closed last week, and the board members were already back in Japan. He was meeting her, Catalina Monet, a name as fabricated as her talent. Serafina had the complete file on her desk in her private study, born Catherine Monaghan, in a forgotten town in Ohio. She'd come to New York with dreams bigger than her portfolio. Now, she was Alistair's latest and most public indulgence. "Of course," Serafina said, her voice betraying nothing. "Don't let me hold you back." He paused at the door, a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossing his face. He'd expected a fight, or tears, or at least a pointed question. The lack of it seemed to unsettle him more than any accusation could have. For a moment, he looked at the woman at the vanity, this beautiful, placid stranger he'd married, and felt a prickle of unease. He'd always mistaken her silence for submission. It was a fatal miscalculation. "The car will be back for you in 30 minutes, he stated, his tone clipped, reasserting his control. "Try to look happy, Serafina. It's a big night for the Vance Foundation." The door clicked shut, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Serafina stared at her reflection for a full minute. The mask of the placid wife did not waver. Then, slowly, she placed the diamond earring back in its velvet box. It was a relic of a past she was about to incinerate. She reached for another set. Emeralds. Green like poison, green like money, green like the envy she was about to inspire. Her phone buzzed on the marble vanity. A single text from her private investigator, a man named Arthur Graves, a discreet ghost who moved through the city's underbelly. "He picked her up. They're 10 minutes from the Met. Are you sure about this, S?" Serafina's fingers danced over the screen, her reply swift and devoid of emotion. "The board is already primed. The proxies are signed. His arrogance is the trigger, Arthur. Let him pull it." She stood, the silk robe pooling at her feet. Waiting for her was not a dress, but a suit of armor, a custom-made Schiaparelli gown in a shocking, visceral crimson. It was the color of blood, the color of power, the color of a warning. Tonight was not a charity gala for the Vance Foundation. It was a coronation. Her coronation. And Alistair had just sent out the invitations. She had been patient for years, gathering threads, documenting indiscretions, creating shell corporations, and moving assets with the quiet precision of a master weaver. She hadn't just built a safety net for herself. She had woven a cage for him, gilded with his own greed and lined with his betrayals. He thought he was walking onto a red carpet. In reality, he was walking onto a battlefield she had designed, and he had just lit the signal fire for his own immolation. The red carpet at the Metropolitan Legacy Gala was a river of flash bulbs and manufactured smiles. It was the apex of New York society, a place where power and fame bled into one another under the merciless gaze of the world's media. Reporters from Vogue, Vanity Fair, and every major news network lined the velvet ropes, their lenses like the hungry eyes of wolves, searching for a story, a scandal, a single moment of imperfection. Tonight, they were about to get a feast. Alistair Vance's Bentley Mulsanne arrived with the understated arrogance befitting his status. The crowd surged, cameras flashing, reporters shouting his name. He emerged first, a vision of tailored power, but it was the woman who followed him out that caused the first wave of gasps. It wasn't Serafina. Catalina Monet was poured into a silver dress that left little to the imagination. She was undeniably beautiful, with the hungry, sharp-edged beauty of a woman who knew it was her only currency. She clung to Alistair's arm, her smile a mixture of triumph and terror. She was playing a dangerous game, and for the first time, she was playing it on the world stage. They posed. Alistair, smug and proprietary, his hand possessively low on her back. Catalina, preening, tilting her head just so, a starlet in her own grand drama. The questions came like machine gun fire. Mr. Vance, a bold statement tonight. Catalina, are you the new face of the Vance Foundation? Where is Mrs. Vance? Alistair simply smiled, a predator's grin. He was enjoying this, the sheer audacity of it. He was Alistair Vance. The rules that governed lesser men, rules of decorum, of fidelity, of simple decency, did not apply to him. He was about to prove it. He leaned in towards Catalina, his voice a low murmur meant only for her, but observed by millions. They want a show? Let's give them one. And then he did it. He dipped her low, a parody of old Hollywood romance, and kissed her. It was not a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, passionate, deliberately provocative kiss, right there in the searing glare of the cameras. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. The frantic clicking of cameras was the only sound. Then, a collective, audible gasp rippled through the press corps and the assembled socialites. This was beyond a simple affair. This was a public execution of a marriage. It was a declaration that Serafina Vance, the elegant, enigmatic woman who had stood by his side for 15 years, was officially replaced, discarded, humiliated on a global scale. Catalina came up for air, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of. She had won. She was no longer a secret, a mistress tucked away in a St. Regis suite. She was here, on the arm of a billionaire, being kissed on the most exclusive red carpet in the world. She felt a surge of victory so potent it was dizzying. She mistook the flashbulbs for starlight, the reporter's shock for admiration. Alistair straightened his jacket, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked directly into the lens of a nearby television camera, as if sending a message directly to his wife, wherever she was, probably crying in their cavernous penthouse. "This is my world," his eyes said. "My rules." "No more questions," he announced, his voice booming with authority. He began to guide Catalina up the grand steps of the museum, leaving a firestorm in his wake. The gossip was already spreading like wildfire, phones lighting up across the city, across the world. The king had publicly crowned his new queen. But the story was not over. In fact, it had barely begun. As Alistair and Catalina reached the top of the stairs, a new commotion began at the curb. It was a different kind of stir. Not the fevered frenzy of a scandal, but a wave of hushed, reverent awe. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, even more imposing than Alistair's Bentley, had glided to a silent stop. The license plate was simple. SV1. A single doorman, looking as if he were greeting royalty, rushed to open the rear door. For a moment, nothing happened. The anticipation was electric. The reporters, sensing a second act, swung their cameras away from Alistair and towards the car. Then, a single leg emerged, encased in a crimson silk stiletto. It was followed by the rest of her. Serafina Vance. When Serafina Vance stepped out of the Rolls-Royce, the world seemed to slow on its axis. The chaotic symphony of the red carpet, the shouting, the flashing lights, the desperate scramble for a story, died down to a stunned, reverent hush. She did not look like a woman who had just been publicly humiliated. She looked like a woman who had come to burn an empire to the ground and dance in its ashes. Her gown was a masterpiece of defiance. The Schiaparelli crimson was so vivid it seemed to bleed into the red carpet itself, a seamless extension of her power. The cut was architectural, severe, with sharp shoulders that spoke of battle armor, and a neckline that plunged with unapologetic confidence. Around her neck was not a delicate string of pearls, but a breathtaking collar of emeralds and black diamonds from Bulgari's Serpenti collection. A serpent coiling around her throat, its head resting near her heart. It was a statement. She was not the victim. She was the viper. Her face was serene, her expression a mask of cool, impenetrable calm. Her hair was swept back in a severe chignon, emphasizing the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. There were no tear tracks, no redness in her eyes. Her gaze swept over the stunned press corps, not with fear or shame, but with an almost pitying authority. It was the look of a queen surveying a crowd of court jesters. She did not rush. She did not falter. She began to walk the length of the carpet alone, her posture perfect, her every movement deliberate and imbued with a grace that was almost terrifying in its control. The cameras, which had been machine guns moments before, were now like the slow, panning shots of a cinematic masterpiece. They were no longer trying to catch a scandal. They were trying to capture an icon. At the top of the stairs, Alistair had stopped, frozen. He turned, his face a mask of disbelief. He had expected her to stay home, to crumble, to call him screaming. He had not expected this public, magnificent defiance. Beside him, Catalina's triumphant smile had evaporated, replaced by a look of stark panic. The silver dress that had seemed so glamorous now looked cheap and desperate next to Serafina's crimson armor. The starlet suddenly looked like what she was. A stand-in, a cheap imitation who had been caught playing dress-up in the Queen's castle. Serafina reached the midway point of the carpet and paused. She turned, not towards her husband, but towards the most prominent camera, the one broadcasting live to millions. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. It was not warm, it was a promise, a threat. In that single silent moment, she commandeered the entire narrative. The story was no longer billionaire cheats on wife. It was now, Serafina Vance has arrived. She resumed her walk. As she approached the stairs, the reporters found their voices, but the questions were different now. Mrs. Vance, you look breathtaking. Serafina, who are you wearing? An incredible statement tonight, Mrs. Vance. She ignored them all, her eyes fixed on a point just over Alistair's head. She ascended the stairs, each step a hammer blow against the foundation of his world. When she reached the landing, she was finally face to face with her husband and his mistress. The air crackled. The three of them stood there, a tableau of betrayal and retribution for what felt like an eternity. Alistair's face was a mixture of fury and confusion. This was not his script. She had torn up the pages and rewritten the play with herself as the lead. Catalina, utterly out of her depth, tried to assert her position, tightening her grip on Alistair's arm. It was a pathetic gesture of ownership that only highlighted her insecurity. Serafina's gaze finally fell upon them. She looked first at Catalina, her eyes sweeping over the younger woman from head to toe, with an expression of profound indifference, as if observing a piece of furniture that had been delivered to the wrong address. She offered no anger, no jealousy, only a dismissal so complete it was more insulting than any slur. Then she looked at her husband. She did not raise her voice. She did not cause a scene. She simply leaned in close, her voice a silken whisper that only he could hear, though the world watched, trying to decipher its meaning. "Enjoy your evening, Alistair," she murmured, her breath cool against his ear. "It's the last one you'll have as the man you think you are." Without waiting for a reply, she straightened up, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the museum's director, who was waiting at the door, and swept past them into the gala. She did not look back. She left Alistair Vance standing on the steps, his mistress on his arm, suddenly looking not like a king with his prize, but like a fool who had just been checkmated in front of the entire world. The reporters gasped, not at the kiss anymore, but at the sheer, unadulterated power of the woman who had just owned the entire event. The inside of the Metropolitan Museum had been transformed into a glittering forest of crystal and starlight. The air hummed with the conversations of the world's 1%, a murmur of money and power set to the music of a string quartet. But tonight, there was only one topic of conversation. The drama that had unfolded on the steps outside had followed them in, clinging to the atmosphere like the expensive perfume on the guests' wrists. Serafina moved through the gala, not as a pariah, but as a conquering general. Heads turned as she passed, conversations faltered. The initial whispers of pity for the poor, cheated wife had been utterly silenced by her arrival. They were replaced by whispers of awe, of fear, of intense speculation. A woman who could face that level of public betrayal with such regal composure was not a woman to be trifled with. Alistair and Catalina entered moments later, the mood shifting around them like iron filings to a magnet. Alistair, accustomed to being the center of admiring attention, found himself the subject of furtive, judgmental glances. His allies in industry, men who normally would have rushed to shake his hand, suddenly found their champagne flutes fascinating. The women, the wives of his peers, looked at Catalina with undisguised contempt before turning to give Serafina subtle, approving nods. In the unspoken social calculus of this world, Alistair had made a fatal error. He had been vulgar. His transgression wasn't the affair itself, those were common enough to be boring, but the crass, public nature of it. He had created a spectacle, and in doing so had shown a profound lack of class. Serafina, meanwhile, was holding court. She made her way to a knot of the city's most powerful figures: Harrison Blackwood, the grizzled chairman of a rival investment bank; Beatrice de la Renta, the ancient matriarch of a fashion dynasty and the gala's chief benefactor; and Judge Peterson, a federal judge whose influence was felt from Wall Street to Washington. "Serafina, my dear," Beatrice said, her voice like gravel and diamonds, taking Serafina's hands in her own. Schiaparelli, a choice for a woman who has something to say without speaking. "Beatrice?" Serafina smiled warmly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I thought tonight called for a little color." Harrison Blackwood, a man who had been Alistair's business rival for 2 decades, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Vance is making a spectacle of himself. Are you all right, Serafina?" This was the moment. The test. Her response would set the tone for the rest of her life. She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes glinting over the rim of the crystal flute. "Alistair has always had a flair for the dramatic," she said, her tone light, almost amused. "He's launching a new venture. I felt it was best he managed his own publicity for it." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. This wasn't a marital collapse. It was a business divergence. By framing it this way, she wasn't the scorned wife. She was a CEO announcing a demerger. The nuance was not lost on them. Blackwood's eyes sharpened with interest. This was the language he understood. Not emotion, but strategy. Meanwhile, Alistair was trying to regain control. He dragged Catalina toward a group of his board members, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Gentlemen, a wonderful evening." The men, most of them in their late 60s, looked from Alistair to the half-dressed starlet on his arm, and then across the room to the vision of elegance that was his wife, who was now laughing with a federal judge. They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Alistair," said one, a conservative named Robert Mills. "Quite the entrance." "Needed to shake things up," Alistair blustered, clapping him on the back. But the bravado rang hollow. He was losing the room, and he knew it. Catalina, sensing the chill, shrank into herself. The fantasy was curdling into a nightmare. She had imagined being welcomed into this world, feted and admired. Instead, she was being looked at like an invasive species. Serafina's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, but on the surface, she was the epitome of grace. She remembered a night, 6 months prior, that had sealed Alistair's fate. She had come home early from a charity board meeting, the quiet hum of the private elevator opening directly into their penthouse. She had heard them. Laughter from the master bedroom, their bedroom. Catalina's shrill, theatrical laugh, and Alistair's deeper, indulgent one. She hadn't stormed in. She had retreated as silently as she arrived, went back down the elevator, and walked for hours through Central Park as dusk fell. The pain was a cold, sharp thing, but it was quickly superseded by a crystalline clarity. The marriage wasn't a partnership to be saved. It was a hostile entity from which she needed to extract herself and her assets. For years, she had channeled her brilliance into his company, her strategies earning them billions. Her name wasn't on the door of Vance Industries, but her fingerprints were on every successful blueprint. That night, she had called Geneviève Dubois, a divorce attorney known less for her courtroom theatrics and more for her reputation as a corporate assassin in couture. Their first meeting wasn't about alimony or dividing property. It was about a hostile takeover. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Alistair boasts, Geneviève had warned in her clipped Parisian accent, sitting opposite Serafina in a discreet law office overlooking the park. Read Clause 12, subsection B, Serafina had replied calmly. The reputational damage clause. I had it drafted. It states that any act of public degradation or humiliation that negatively impacts the stock value of Vance Industries nullifies the financial caps on the settlement. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows had risen. And how would you prove a direct link between public humiliation and stock value? By ensuring they happen at the same time, Serafina had said. Alistair is arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He's about to make a very big, very public mistake. And when he does, we will be ready to burn him to the ground. Now standing in the grand hall of the museum, surrounded by the powerful, Serafina felt the last vestiges of the hurt wife fall away, replaced entirely by the cold, thrilling certainty of the CEO. The party wasn't the end game. It was a public relations move, a brilliant one. She was establishing her narrative, casting herself as the victor before the battle had even officially begun. Alistair thought he was playing checkers. She had been playing multidimensional chess for years, and his queen was about to take his king. While the gala continued its charade of civility, a different kind of drama was unfolding in the silent, illuminated canyons of the financial district. This was Serafina's true battlefield, a realm of algorithms and stock tickers where fortunes were won and lost in nanoseconds. At precisely 9:47 p.m., just as the first course was being served at the gala, an alert flashed across the desk of every major financial journalist in the country. It was an SEC filing, submitted through a labyrinthine series of shell corporations based in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands, all perfectly legal, all masterfully orchestrated by Geneviève Dubois' forensic accounting team. The filing announced that a previously unknown investment consortium, Crimson Holdings, had acquired a 15% stake in Vance Industries. The shares had been bought up quietly, in small, untraceable blocks over the past 6 months. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was Crimson Holdings' stated intention: to initiate a vote of no confidence in the CEO, Alistair Vance, citing erratic and reputationally damaging behavior that posed a material risk to shareholder value. Simultaneously, an anonymous and devastatingly detailed report was leaked to the Wall Street Journal. It outlined a pattern of Alistair's corporate malfeasance, using the company jet for personal trysts, awarding a lucrative marketing contract to a company with deep ties to Catalina Monet, and funneling foundation money into vanity projects. Each claim was backed by scanned receipts, flight manifests, and internal emails. The source was untraceable, but the information was impeccable. It was the entire dossier Arthur Graves had compiled over a year of painstaking work. Back at the gala, Alistair's phone began to vibrate incessantly. He ignored it at first, trying to focus on charming a potential investor. But then his CFO's face appeared on the screen, a look of sheer panic in his eyes. Alistair excused himself, his irritation palpable. He stepped into a quiet alcove, the festive music a mocking counterpoint to the storm about to break. "What is it, David?" he snapped. "This better be important." "Alistair, have you seen the news?" David's voice was strained. "The Journal just dropped a story. It's bad. And there's an SEC filing. A group called Crimson Holdings is making a move. They're calling your character into question, demanding a vote." Alistair felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a feeling so foreign he barely recognized it. "Crimson Holdings? I've never heard of them. Who the hell are they?" "We don't know. It's a ghost. But they have the shares, Alistair. And the timing. God, the timing with what you did on the red carpet. The board is going insane. The Asian markets open in a few hours. The stock is going to get slaughtered." Alistair's mind raced. This was a coordinated attack. Sophisticated. Brutal. It wasn't random. His eyes scanned the crowded room, searching, and then they landed on her. Serafina. She was standing by the large glass enclosure of the Temple of Dender, speaking with Harrison Blackwood. She looked over at him, her expression unreadable, and then she lifted her champagne flute in a silent, mocking toast. Crimson, the color of her dress. The blood drained from his face. It was her. It had to be her. But how? She didn't have that kind of capital, that kind of cunning. He had always seen her as an accessory, a beautiful and intelligent fixture in his life, but ultimately a dependent. The idea that she could orchestrate a corporate raid of this magnitude was unthinkable. He started towards her, shoving people aside, his mask of charm ripped away to reveal the raw fury beneath. Catalina, seeing him charge across the room, tried to follow, calling his name, but she was just part of the wake of his destruction now. He cornered Serafina against the cool stone of the ancient temple's enclosure. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "This is you. Crimson Holdings. How did you do this?" Serafina didn't flinch. She took a final, delicate sip of her champagne and placed the empty flute on a passing waiter's tray. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze as cold and hard as the emeralds at her throat. "You're mistaken, Alistair," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I didn't do this. You did. You just weren't paying attention." "The money, Serafina. Where did you get the money for the shares?" he demanded, grabbing her arm. Harrison Blackwood stepped forward. "Vance, I suggest you take your hands off her." Alistair barely registered him. His world was tilting, the floor giving way beneath him. Serafina looked down at his hand on her arm with disgust, and then back at his face. For 15 years, every investment strategy, every market prediction, every successful acquisition for Vance Industries came from my research, my analysis. While you were taking the credit, I was taking a commission, a very small, legally stipulated consulting fee that was funneled into a private trust, a clause you were too arrogant to ever read in the mountain of paperwork I prepared for you. She pulled her arm free. "I didn't buy your company with your money, darling. I bought it with my salary. And now," she added, a chilling smile gracing her lips, "thanks to your little performance tonight, Clause 12, subsection B of our prenuptial agreement has been triggered. The reputational damage clause. The cap on my settlement is now gone. Your personal fortune is next." It was the unseen blade, not a weapon of passion, but a scalpel of pure, cold logic, wielded with a surgeon's precision. He had been so busy with his public betrayal that he had completely missed the private execution that had been happening for years, right under his nose. He had thought he was the vulture, but he had been the carcass all along, and she had just begun to feast. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the time the sun rose over New York, the name Alistair Vance was no longer synonymous with power, but with scandal and spectacular collapse. The Asian markets opened first, and it was a bloodbath. Vance Industries' stock plummeted by 40% in the first hour of trading. The damning Wall Street Journal article had spread globally, and investors were panicking. The story of his affair was now just a colorful footnote to the real narrative. A CEO whose recklessness and poor judgment had made the company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. His public kiss hadn't just humiliated his wife, it had cost his shareholders billions. Alistair spent the night in his office, a modern prison of glass and steel overlooking the city that no longer felt like his kingdom. He was a caged animal, roaring down the phone at lawyers, bankers, and board members, but their voices were distant, wary. The loyalty he had commanded through fear and wealth was evaporating. He was no longer a winner, and in their world, there was no place for losers. He tried to fight back. He issued a press release denying the allegations, calling them a baseless attack by a shadowy corporate raider. But it was useless. The evidence was too specific, too damning. The public, fueled by the delicious drama of the gala, had already cast him as the villain. News channels replayed the clip of the kiss, followed by the footage of Serafina's magnificent arrival, creating a perfect, irresistible narrative of a fallen king and a rising queen. Catalina Monet became a casualty of the war. Her agent dropped her. The lucrative marketing contract was rescinded. She was hounded by paparazzi, but they no longer treated her like a budding star. They treated her like a home wrecker, a punchline. She called Alistair repeatedly, but her calls went straight to voicemail. He had used her as a prop in his own downfall, and now she was discarded. Her 15 minutes of fame had been a public immolation. The definitive blow came 3 days after the gala. An emergency board meeting was called. Alistair walked into the boardroom, the long mahogany table filled with grim-faced men who had once fawned over him. At the head of the table, in his chair, sat Harrison Blackwood, and via a large video screen, patched in from her lawyer's office, was Serafina. She was wearing a crisp, white power suit, her expression neutral. "What is the meaning of this, Harrison?" Alistair demanded, his voice hoarse. "It's simple, Alistair," Blackwood said, his tone devoid of sympathy. "Crimson Holdings, in partnership with my bank and several other key institutional investors, now controls a 51% voting bloc. We're exercising our rights. The board has voted. You're out, effective immediately." "You can't do this," Alistair roared, his face purple with rage. "It's already done." Serafina's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear from the monitor. "Your personal assets are frozen, pending our divorce settlement. The company jet has been recalled. Your corporate accounts are sealed. You will be escorted from the building by security. You are no longer CEO, president, or chairman. You are, for all intents and purposes, a private citizen with a great many legal problems." He stared at her image on the screen, this woman he had so profoundly underestimated. He saw no triumph in her eyes, no gloating, only the dispassionate finality of a business transaction. He had made himself a liability, and she had liquidated him. "Why, Serafina?" he asked, his voice finally breaking, the rage giving way to a raw, bewildered despair. After all these years, why? She was silent for a moment, and for the first time, a flicker of something personal crossed her features. It wasn't hatred. It was a distant, almost academic pity. "You built this prison yourself, Alistair," she said softly. "You just never saw the bars. You demanded loyalty, but offered none. You craved admiration, but respected no one. You saw my love as a commodity, and my intelligence as a tool for your own enrichment. This isn't revenge. It is a market correction." The security guards entered the room. They were polite, but firm. As they led a stunned, broken Alistair Vance from the boardroom he had built, he passed the large portrait of himself that hung in the hallway, the one commissioned after their first billion-dollar year. It depicted him as a titan, a master of the universe. It was the man he thought he was. But as he looked at the image of his wife on the screen, her face calm and in control, he finally understood the truth. He had never been the titan. He had only been its gaudy, disposable figurehead. The real power, the silent, patient, and utterly ruthless force, had been beside him all along. And he had been too blind to see it until it was far, far too late. 6 months later, the name Vance Industries was gone, scrubbed from the monolith of glass and steel in Midtown Manhattan. In its place, etched in elegant, formidable lettering, was a new name, Crimson. The transition had been swift and brutal. Serafina, acting as the primary stakeholder of the new controlling interest, had not taken the CEO title for herself. That would have been too predictable, too much like Alistair's own vanity. Instead, she had installed a respected industry veteran to handle day-to-day operations, while she assumed the role of executive chairwoman of the board. Her power was absolute, but it was quiet, strategic, just as it had always been. The press, which had been obsessed with the salacious details of the divorce, quickly shifted its focus. They were now fascinated by the brilliant, enigmatic woman who had outmaneuvered one of the most feared men on Wall Street. Forbes ran a cover story titled, "The Architect, How Serafina Rothschild Built and Reclaimed Her Empire." She had reverted to her maiden name, a name synonymous with old-world financial acumen, severing the final tie to her past life. Her first act as chairwoman was to clean house. She dismantled Alistair's network of cronies, purged the toxic, high-pressure culture he had fostered, and implemented policies focused on sustainable, long-term growth rather than his slash-and-burn tactics. She reinvested in research and development, established a genuine philanthropic foundation that did more than just host parties, and promoted several brilliant women within the company whom Alistair had consistently overlooked. The company didn't just survive, it thrived. The stock, now under the ticker CSON, rebounded and climbed to heights it had never reached under Alistair's chaotic leadership. Alistair Vance, meanwhile, had faded into ignominy. The divorce had been devastating. With the prenup nullified, Serafina's legal team, led by the formidable Genevieve Dubois, had systematically dismantled his personal fortune, proving that much of it was inextricably tied to corporate assets he had misused. He was left with a fraction of his wealth, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to ever wield power again. He sold the penthouse and the Hamptons estate. He was seen occasionally in Europe, looking older, greyer, a ghost at the tables he once owned. As for Catalina Monet, she had disappeared from the public eye completely, rumored to have returned to Ohio, her Hollywood dreams reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. One crisp autumn afternoon, Serafina stood in her new office, which occupied the same top floor as Alistair's had. She had redecorated completely. The dark, masculine mahogany and leather were gone, replaced with light woods, modern art, this time by female artists, and a sense of clean, uncluttered space. The massive, egotistical portrait of Alistair was gone, replaced by a vast, abstract canvas of swirling crimson and gold. She looked out the window at the city spread before her. It was the same view Alistair had stared at, but she saw something different. He had seen a kingdom to be conquered, a reflection of his own ego. She saw a complex, interconnected system, a network of possibilities, a chessboard awaiting its next move. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Madam Chairwoman, the board from the Singapore solar tech firm is on the line. They're ready to discuss your acquisition offer." A small smile touched Serafina's lips. This was her next move, a pivot into green energy, a field Alistair had always dismissed as sentimental nonsense. It was a move for the future, not the past. "Patch them through, please," she said, her voice calm, confident, and utterly in control. She sat down at her desk, not the oversized throne Alistair had used, but a sleek, functional piece of design. She picked up the phone, her emerald and diamond serpent ring glinting in the afternoon light. She hadn't destroyed Alistair's world out of simple revenge. She had done it to build her own. The red carpet hadn't been an ending. It had been a birth. The fiery, public birth of an empress, forged in betrayal, crowned in defiance, and now ready to rule. A year is a lifetime in a city that never sleeps. For Serafina Rothschild, the past 12 months had been a period of relentless, disciplined reconstruction. The name Alistair Vance was now a historical footnote, a case study taught in business schools on the perils of hubris. Crimson, under her stewardship, had become a behemoth of innovation and ethical capitalism, a stark rebuke to the corporate raiding culture of the past. Her public image was flawless, a phoenix, a titan of industry, a feminist icon celebrated on magazine covers and revered in boardrooms. She had won. The victory was total, absolute, and undeniable. And yet, there were moments, often in the deep stillness of the night, when she would stand in her new penthouse, a marvel of minimalist architecture overlooking Central Park, all clean lines and cool marble, and feel the profound silence. It was a different silence from the one she had shared with Alistair. That had been a silence thick with unspoken resentments and looming betrayals. This was a new kind of quiet, the silence of the summit. The air was thin up here, and she was utterly, completely alone. She had a staff, a board, a coterie of admirers, but no confidants. Power, she had discovered, was the most effective insulation in the world. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, as the autumn light cast long shadows across her sprawling office, that the past sent a messenger. Her executive assistant, a fiercely competent young woman named Claire, buzzed her on the intercom, her voice laced with an uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Madam Chairwoman," Claire began, "I apologize for the interruption. There is a woman in the lobby. She has no appointment, but she refuses to leave. She says she will wait all day if she must." She gave the name Catherine Monaghan. Serafina froze, her fingers hovering over a tablet displaying quarterly projections. Catherine Monaghan. The real name. The Ohio name. A ghost in a bargain bin dress, rattling the chains of a life Serafina had meticulously demolished. Her first instinct was a cold, swift denial. Have security remove her. It was the efficient, logical move, a loose end from a previous business transaction, now irrelevant. But she didn't say it. A sliver of something she couldn't immediately name. Not pity, perhaps curiosity, or the strategist's innate dislike for an unresolved variable, held her back. What could this woman possibly want? The money was gone. The man was gone. The life she had coveted was a heap of ashes. "Send her up, Claire," Serafina said, her voice betraying nothing of the sudden turbulence in her mind. "See that we are not disturbed for the next 30 minutes. A few moments later, the heavy oak door to her office swung open. The woman who walked in was almost unrecognizable. The brassy blonde hair was now a mousy, natural brown, cut in a simple, unstylish bob. The predatory ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, weary exhaustion. She wore a plain grey coat and jeans. The last time Serafina had seen her, she had been dripping in borrowed diamonds and desperation on the arm of a billionaire. Now, she just looked like a woman who had taken a long, hard fall back to earth. "Mrs. Vance." "Ms. Rothschild," Catherine corrected herself, her voice quiet, tentative. "Thank you for seeing me." Serafina remained seated behind her enormous desk, a slab of polished obsidian that served as both a workspace and a barrier. She gestured to one of the chairs opposite her. "Please, sit." Catherine sat on the edge of the chair, looking small and out of place amidst the soaring ceilings and priceless art. She didn't look at Serafina, but at her own hands, twisting them in her lap. "I'm sure you're wondering why I'm here," Catherine began. "I don't want money. I know there's none to be had. Not from you, not from him. I needed to ask you something." Serafina waited, her face a mask of polite neutrality. She would not offer an inch of emotion. This was a business meeting. Catherine finally looked up, and her eyes were surprisingly clear. The terror and triumph of that night at the gala were gone. What remained was a raw, painful sobriety. "He told me he loved me," she said, the words simple, unadorned. "He told me you were just a business partner, an arrangement, that you hadn't shared a bed in years. He said your marriage was a loveless cage, and he was desperate to get out. He promised me everything, a career, a future, a family." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "I was so stupid. I know that now. I was a cliché from a bad movie. But I believed him. I believed him because I wanted to. When he kissed me on that carpet, for 1 second, I thought I had won. I thought my real life was starting." Serafina's composure was a fortress, but a flicker of an old memory breached the walls. Alistair, years ago, telling her the same things about his first wife when he had been pursuing her. The same script, the same promises. He wasn't a monster of invention. He was a machine of repetition, finding a new gear to grind with each new person he consumed. "Your point, Miss Monaghan?" Serafina's voice was cool. "My point," Catherine said, leaning forward slightly, her gaze intensifying, "is that I was a weapon. He was using me to hurt you. But you were using me too, weren't you? My file, your investigator. You knew he was bringing me to the gala. You knew he was going to do something stupid and public. You wanted him to. That kiss, it wasn't just his betrayal of you. It was the trigger for your trap. I was the bullet in your gun." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and precise. Serafina did not deny it. It was, after all, the truth. "You made a choice to be with a married man," Serafina stated, her tone clinical. "Choices have consequences." "I know that," Catherine's voice rose, cracking with a year of pent-up anguish. "And I am living with them. My name is Poison. My face is a meme for home wreckers. I had to move back to Ohio and work in a diner to help my parents pay the legal fees from the lawsuits your husband's stupid contract got me into. I own my choices. But you sit up here in your palace in the sky, and you pretend this was all just a clean market correction. But it wasn't, was it? It was personal. He broke your heart, and so you broke his world, and mine along with it." For the first time, Serafina felt a genuine crack in her armor. She had thought of Catherine as an obstacle, a variable, a tool. She had never truly considered the human cost for the woman who had been the public face of the scandal. She had dehumanized her rival just as effectively as Alistair had. Catherine seemed to sense the shift. She leaned back, her brief flare of anger spent, leaving only the exhaustion behind. Her next words were not an accusation, but a genuine soul-weary question. "I have to know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Was it worth it? All this?" She gestured vaguely at the opulent office, the city skyline, the empire at Serafina's feet. "Did it fix what he broke in you? Are you happy now?" The question pierced Serafina with an unexpected force. "Are you happy?" It was such a simple question, yet no one had dared ask it of her in a year. They asked about her projections, her strategies, her acquisitions. They did not ask about her heart. She looked past Catherine, out the vast window at the panorama of her victory. She had power, respect, freedom, and more wealth than she could ever spend. She had avenged herself with a brilliance that would be spoken of for generations. She had everything she had fought for. But happy? Happiness was a warmth, a connection, a quiet sense of peace. Her life was a marvel of engineering, a perfectly functioning, climate-controlled machine. It was not warm. Her connections were transactional, and peace. Peace was a distant shore she had not yet reached. The vigilance never ended. The memory of the betrayal, though avenged, had left a permanent shard of ice in her soul. She had won the war, but she had become a creature of it, forever scanning the horizon for the next threat. She finally turned her gaze back to Catherine Monaghan, to the other woman he had broken. She saw not a rival, but a reflection in a warped mirror, a younger, more naive version of a woman who had once also believed the promises of Alistair Vance. "No," Serafina said, the single word costing her more than any billion-dollar deal. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its usual authority, leaving only a raw honesty. "It is not a cure for the wound. The victory is in the survival, Ms. Monaghan, not in the spoils." She stood up and walked to a smaller personal desk in the corner of the room. She wrote something on a piece of her personal stationery, folded it, and slid it into an envelope. She walked back and handed it to Catherine. "This is the name of a woman who runs a non-profit in Chicago that helps women start new businesses. There is also a cashier's check that will cover your parents' legal fees and your relocation. It is not an apology. It is, as you said, a consequence. You were collateral damage in a war you didn't understand. I am correcting the balance sheet." Catherine stared at the envelope, her eyes welling with tears for the first time. "Why?" "Because my empire is built on sound principles," Serafina said, her voice regaining a fraction of its cool command. "And I do not abide loose ends or unbalanced ledgers. Your association with Alistair Vance is over. Your association with me is now concluded. What you do next is entirely your own." Catherine stood, clutching the envelope, and for a moment the two women simply looked at each other across the vast expanse of the office. They were not friends, not enemies, not rivals anymore. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, standing on opposite shores. After Catherine had gone, Serafina walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of crimson and gold, the colors of her brand, of her victory painting. But for the first time, the colors didn't feel like triumph. They felt like a warning, an echo. She had built a fortress to protect herself from ever being hurt again. but she was now its solitary prisoner. She had mastered the world of finance, of strategy, of power, but the quiet, uncharted territory of her own heart remained a wilderness. The battle was won, but she was beginning to understand that the search for peace was a war fought entirely on her own, and it had only just begun. And so, the reign of Alistair Vance ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, decisive click of a boardroom door. Serafina Rothschild proved that the most powerful move isn't always the loudest. Sometimes it's the one nobody sees coming until it's too late. She didn't just survive a public humiliation. She weaponized it, turning a moment of profound betrayal into the greatest leverage of her life. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a hostile takeover of her own destiny. What do you think? Was Serafina's plan a stroke of genius or a cold-hearted masterpiece of revenge? Could Alistair have ever seen it coming? If you love stories of epic comebacks, brilliant strategy, and seeing power shift in the most dramatic way possible, then show some love by hitting that like button. Share this video with anyone who knows that true strength often works in silence. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories where the game is played for the highest stakes. Let us know in the comments below. What was the single most powerful move Serafina made?